So our final speaker in this section, it's my pleasure to introduce Huang. She's an associate professor of marketing and the R. Michael Shanahan Faculty Scholar at Stanford University. Suchi has published extensively in the areas like consumer goals, but more recently she's interested in how AI affects health and well-being. And today she's going to share some of her super interesting work in that area. So, round of applause for Suchi.
First of all, thank you, Juliana and Nate, for putting together such an amazing institute. And of course, thank you, Shiri and Bob, for organizing this conference and inviting me. As Shiri's instructor said, I'm a faculty at a business school, but actually I am trained as a motivation scientist. So my interest in this space is to think about how the human and machine relationship, or human and technology relationship, may actually lead to certain motivational consequences. For instance, does it motivate us to choose certain kind of products or avoid certain kind of products? Does it motivate us to actually make healthier choices in our lives or actually binge eat? Does it motivate us to actually be more pro-social and want to help other human beings, or the opposite? So today, instead of diving into a very specific project and show you 12 studies that we ran, I decided that we're going to take a bird's eye view. I'm going to talk about 3 different types of human-technology relationships we have explored so far, and 3 different types of motivational consequences we have observed so far. So I think this room of audience doesn't need convincing that digital revolution is happening everywhere. My specific interest is in the consumer space, so technologies that consumers can interact with, can see. So it can go from teleconferencing devices that we have been using a lot, service robots that's definitely working in kitchens and restaurants, educational robots, assistance robots in hospitals, for instance, and all the way to sex robots that looks like perfect human being, definitely have perfect body, and serve a very specific function. Specifically, across these different types of robots, we think that there are at least 3 different ways we can think about that relationship. And many of them flow from Stefano's framework that he talked about earlier. For instance, the first thing we can think about is that humans, when they interact with the technology, they may actually want to compare themselves to machines. So there's some kind of a comparison or competition that may happen there. And if so, that could lead to motivational consequences. Another type of relationship we can think about is that we actually are the one that's vulnerable there. We build the technology to come here and help us, to assist us, doing things that is hard for human beings to do. In that case, it might be more of a collaborative relationship. The third type of relationship we are theorizing is that in many situations, we may actually, in some way, morph with technology. We want to become like one. We want to think like them. We want to look like them. And I'm going to talk more about what we meant by that. So for the first relationship, specifically thinking about how human can be compared with technology and what that looks like in the consumer world, we look into what we call human as machine representations. So it turns out we actually see that starting from 1920 all the way to today. For instance, the way we think about how the body is built, if you look at children's book, how they introduce body, a lot of times they compare human to machines. It is a perfect human machine, for instance, or the education book will talk about how the human's digestive system function like a factory, like a machine that has input and has closely related output. We see devices these days that also try to make that human as machine representation. So for instance, we can see our colleague's head attached to a robotic body, and that could be a teleconferencing machine or a machine that doctors actually use to operate. In that case, of course, it serves a function, but also mentally, we're connecting human to machine and potentially creating that comparison. In the marketing space, we know that this metaphor is used in commercials a lot. Kit Kat, for instance, say, if you feel like you're working like a machine, and you don't want to be, you take your chocolate bar, so you become a human again. It's using a comparison to motivate us to make a certain kind of decision. So we see this human as machine comparison that show up in consumers' world, in commercials, and in our health education materials. What my colleague and I are interested in is how does that shape our choices, specifically in the health domain, since in the beginning that was used heavily in health education. So throughout our studies, what we did is we come up with different kinds of stimuli. So half of our participants, for instance, will see a human stimuli demonstrated by the human digestive system. The other half will be randomly assigned to see actually human as factory demonstration. And we basically copy that from different kinds of education materials from all around the world. Another kind of a set of studies, we actually move beyond digestive system and use something such as teleconferencing devices. So if you are randomly assigned to actually see a human stimuli, you'll just see a human as your colleague that you are interacting with. If you're assigned to the technology, human as machine kind of a representation condition, you might see something more like this, where your colleague's head is attached to a robotic body, potentially evoking that metaphor that human can look like machines and become like one. We also have videos that we created where this teleconferencing machine is actually moving around and interacting, so you can actually see it come to life. So throughout these different stimuli, what we are curious about specifically in this project is how does that make us choose differently when it comes to healthy food? So after people are exposed to different stimuli, usually there are some filler tasks, and then we give them healthy choices. We try all kinds of different kinds of dependent measures. So you could be food coupon that you pick to help you purchase different kinds of food after you leave our experiment. It could be actual snacks that you can pick up and just consume right there in our lab. We also have tried running the study in a dining hall where the diners are actually making their lunch purchases. So all kinds of food choices that we explored. Before I show you the results, I'm going to ask you to guess, what do you think will happen when we compare human to machines, either through those digestive system illustrations or teleconferencing devices? If you think that it helps people make healthier choices, show of hands a little bit, so I can see a few votes. If you think that it makes people make less healthy choices, show of hands. I feel like I see a split here. Well, the good news is you're both right. Turns out it depends. We actually see two completely opposite effects. And turns out it depends on kind of how you think about your health behavior overall. So I'm going to direct your attention to this side of the graph first. What we found is that if you chronically think that you have good health self-control, and that's defined by you are pretty successful in monitoring what you eat, monitoring your salt intake, you're pretty good at making sure you go to the gym if you care about working out. What we found is that human as machine stimuli is actually great. When you evoke those kind of comparison in people, they choose lower calorie snacks, and that's consistently how we kind of frame it, it's actually healthier options. So in that case, the health education materials are successful. The more I make you think about your body as a machine, you actually think that I need to pick something that's like a fuel to my body, something that's rational, something I actually need. So you pick something that has more substance and less of those things that we don't need, such as fat and sugar. You make healthier choices. If we live in a world where all the consumers are in this space, then I would say, great, that's the policy and material we should keep on using. But it turns out, a lot of people fall on this side of the graph, where we call them, they have low health self-control. That might be the type of people who chronically struggle with making healthy choices. It's difficult for them to stick to a gut diet, to monitor their health or salt intake. It's difficult for them to motivate themselves to exercise. And that's a big part of the consumer segment. When they're in this space, what we found is that the human as machine stimuli did something to them as well. It backfired. When they see themselves being portrayed or compared to the machines, what we found in other studies is that it makes them kind of create this comparison. Okay, I need to be like one. I need to think with my head, choose food with my head and rationality. And that's hard because that's something that they know they're bad at. So if I try to do something I can't do it, what should I do? I go do the opposite. So they end up picking higher calorie food when they saw those stimuli compared to our control or compared to seeing a human making the same choice or seeing the human being illustrated. So the human as machine stimuli basically backfire among the people who are already struggling with their health goals, which could be a very big problem because we are relying on many of those materials to talk about food choices, to educate our children, or even education materials in college have been using those illustrations to try to educate how we should think about our body. So we want to explore some interventions, some ways that we can actually help people overcome the backfire effect that we observe on the left side repeatedly across our studies. One intervention idea we have tested is we actually went to Stanford Dining Hall, where diners come in and they choose their lunch entrees, they have to pay for it, and they eat it right there. What we did is we stopped them before they come in. We give them some flyers. One set of flyer is basically another illustration of what I showed you earlier, where humans portrayed as machines, and we show the digestive system. The cover story is that this is just an advertising message we are testing. We are a marketing team, so we want to know how people feel. So they kind of evaluate how colorful it is and how much they like this ad, and then they go in and pick their lunch. The other set of people were randomly assigned to see the human as machine illustrations, but we have our intervention message down there as well. And we said, this is what the ad looked like. And it's actually highlighting that you can choose your food today with your head and not with your heart. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to enhance people's belief of their capability that, hey, this is not that hard to do, and actually you can do it today. We want to see if this helps to cancel the effect that this comparison may naturally kind of introduce to people who are bad at self-control. After people do the survey, just evaluating how colorful and engaging the ad is, they go in to pick their lunch, they pay for it. When they came out, the RAs approached them, took a picture of their food, basically, and then also capture how much they paid for it, how much they plan to eat that day. And we called it the actual lunch purchases people made. What we found is that this intervention message turns out to have no effect to people who are good at health self-control. So they are still picking healthy choices. It doesn't affect them. It's reinforcing something they already know. For people who are bad at health self-control, we see that this one backfired again, whereas this one helped them recover from that backfire effect. So they make a little bit healthier choices compared to the condition that doesn't have the intervention message. So from this line of project, we felt like we learned a few things. First, we learned that the human as machine representation is everywhere, and those things could prompt people to want to compare themselves to machine, which is usually inferred as something that use rationality, only use their head and not their heart. And we found that if they believe that this is something that's doable, then actually they will try to assimilate, to act more like a machine and become more rational in their choices. In the health domain, that means making healthier choices. But if they don't believe that this is doable, they actually would deviate from that standard that's non-achievable, and they actually make worse choices. And we believe that even though we are looking at food choices here, it could have an implication to other irrational behaviors, such as impulsive shopping, impulsive investing, and other risk-taking behavior. As long as we encounter this stimuli, we are making those comparisons. If we fail when it comes to those comparisons, we might go and do the opposite. Be more human, but in other words, potentially be more impulsive. So that's one relationship we have studied. The second kind of a relationship we explored is what happens when we design machines and devices to come here and help us, which happens a lot. And our specific focus is disaster response robots and machines in those projects. So since 9/11, US government has adopted disaster response robots and machines, and they are usually in the front line of the rescue. And since then, we see news featuring these robots usually are going to a hurricane where hurricane just happened or mudslide, and it's being adopted all around the world as well. When the fire happened in Notre Dame, the robots were the first one that got sent in to really make sure that they put up the fire, make sure that they can rescue and identify the survivors. So we are curious about these disaster response robots that are designed to guarantee people's safety. How do people actually react to these devices? And of course, during COVID-19, we have all seen them cleaning the hospitals. In Singapore, I've seen robots that actually go around the park and tell people to keep 6 feet distance. If you don't, they chase you down and keep on telling you, keep 6 feet distance. So we have been relying on all kinds of robots and machines when it comes to disaster response. So what we did is we kind of captured real-world news, and of course, made some modification, and we let people kind of watch the news or read the news report on different kinds of disasters. It's a pretty depressing study. After they read about these disasters, we told them, okay, people came to rescue, but they're randomly assigned to see different kinds of rescue teams. One type of rescue teams are all human. The other types that are robot-based. We highlight the robots are coming in to rescue. The rest of the text are exactly the same. Across our different studies, we highlight different kinds of robots. So sometimes the robots look more like human. This one look half human, half machine. We have ones that look just like airplane. That's actually the one used in Paris. And so some don't look like human. At least in the context of our study, we found that the pattern seems to be quite consistent. What we found is that when you highlight in the news story that it is a human team that came to rescue, people feel quite encouraged. They like those stories. When it's robots coming to rescue us, rather they remember it's exciting and interesting, they don't feel as encouraged and as pro-social. This has important motivational consequences because for some of our studies, we actually ask people to make a donation to a local charity after the study. For instance, in one study, we were running a donation drive in Silicon Valley. We worked with Hope Services that basically collected used clothing and books to help children in need of those materials to go to school. So it's completely unrelated to the disaster people just read about. But we want to know that if there's any kind of consequences on their behavior. So what we found is that if you happen to read about the robot news, the robot was rescuing people, then you feel less encouraged by that news story. And what happens when we feel less encouraged is that we have less of this positive energy to want to go out there and help other people. So if I approach you then to ask for donations, people are less likely to actually sign up and to actually donate. Compared to if we watch the human story, we feel very inspired and encouraged, we are more likely to be pro-social. And this happens in a context where the charity has nothing to do with the disaster that actually happened. So we observe some spillover effect that affect other charities in the region. So again, as always, I want to think about solutions. What do we do? Because news stories is going to be out there. There are a lot of YouTube videos about COVID robots out there. If it's going to negatively impact the charities and pro-social organizations in the region, it's a big problem. And so we ran all kinds of different intervention studies. This is one study. The paper is conditionally accepted, just got the news last week. This study did not end up in the package, so Stefano, I felt your pain. So this is a great environment to actually share what we did in the study. So what we wanted to do in the intervention is we actually think about the fact that robots a lot of times are not working alone. They are working with humans. So the rescue team actually have both players. What if we play with that team dynamics differently? So in one condition, for instance, we talk about how robots actually work with humans like they're parallel teammates. So the relationship is actually equal. And we talk about how there are teammates that can work with you hand in hand, and this equal partnership will continue. So this kind of pull back to Christian's point earlier. In this case, we're in some way subtly helping people understand that robots can make their own decisions. There is autonomy there. They are working with humans to decide what's the important goal and to do this together. In the other condition, we highlight the opposite, how robots are subordinate to humans. So we're talking about a hierarchical relationship where humans on top, they tell robots what to do. What we found is that when we frame robots as a partner to humans, in some way giving them this autonomy, they choose to do this hard work, we were able to help people feel more encouraged by it, compared to if we think about it as a subordinate or we don't say anything else about the robots. I think these two later bars are actually interesting. That means without telling people specifically how robots work with humans, the assumption is that they are subordinates. And so we are less interested in what they do, we feel less encouraged by them. So additional information is actually important there to frame them as partner, so they seem more autonomous in their helping behavior, that they actually want to run into the fire to do it. That's their choice. And we feel more encouraged that people are sacrificing, or robots are sacrificing themselves to help humans. And we did link that to donation results as well. When we do that, we observe higher donations. So what we learned from this line of studies is that in some way, we realized that these disaster response robots are great innovation, but it could be costly to nonprofit organizations. We found several solutions, such as framing them as partners, or more directly, just talking about how they're autonomous, self-directed. They made the decision to rescue. Or the other way, we also found that you can also talk about how robots are actually vulnerable and can be harmed. We gave some description about how the chip is designed and prolonged heat can actually permanently damage the robot. So in some way, they can die when they're rescuing humans. And that similarly also helps us feel more encouraged by the robot's behavior, and that again led to higher prosociality. And we believe this line of results have implications not just to government agencies that adopt disaster response robots, but also for nonprofit organizations that seek donations for the cause they care about. So the last relationship I want to talk about is something we just recently started exploring, so very early stage, and specifically looking at how humans compare themselves to robots and want to become one, how we want to look more perfect, have perfect body and perfect face. What I want to talk about is digital alteration. I know it came up yesterday as well. So we see a lot of this, and I used to work in advertising when I was in Asia, and we actually did that many years ago in advertising as well. We photoshopped the celebrities' images before we put them out there. So our first step at this question is let's first look at what traditional advertising do, and then we can look at what social influencers do. So in order to answer this question, we first went to China. We collected 1,300 different ad images that was used with a big human face on top. So usually they are skincare products or makeup products. We have coders code how Photoshop or digitally altered they think the images are. And usually you can tell some photos don't even look like humans anymore, and some look more like real human. And we were able to connect those ad images to the sales results of that quarter. So we were able to connect those brands' sales in that quarter when the advertising is live. What we observed is a very interesting curvilinear trend in the sense that the more you Photoshop, actually the company got rewarded first, the sales increase. But of course, as you over Photoshop, then we see a drop. The companies start getting penalized for their exercise, and the sales actually is a decrease. Here, of course, is correlational data. Many other factors could be at play. So we also launched lab studies to try to replicate this. In the lab studies, we use social influencers. We get their raw pictures. We let them volunteer that. And we Photoshop to a different level. You can see this one definitely looks more like the machines or robots we would design out there, whereas that looked like a real human being. We let the social influencer endorse different kinds of products, like tea products, for instance, in this case. We again saw a curvilinear trend. When you digitally alter the images a little bit, it's great. Social influencers get more liked, and whatever she endorsed also get more interest. But as you Photoshop more, it actually dropped down again. The social influencer got penalized. So as a motivation scientist, my interest is less so on the second part of the graph, because I believe that the market corrects itself. If you get penalized because you over Photoshop your photo, then I believe that people will do it less. My concern is on the first part of the graph, the fact that people do get rewarded a little bit when they modify their images a little bit out there. And based on the literature, we know that this has negative impact on young consumers when it comes to how they think about their body and their self-esteem. So for the rest of our initial studies, we try to look at different kinds of solutions. So for instance, a lot of the apps these days, if you use that to alter your photo, they give you an option to actually add a watermark on it. Facebook is experimenting with this as well. You can mark your photo, say, hey, I did alter this one. You can also voluntarily add a hashtag, say, I have no filter versus I do. I did alter it with technology a little bit. So I wish I had more exciting news to tell you today that some of them worked. So far, it has been quite frustrating. None of the hashtag or watermark or even the solutions that many government in Europe is actually thinking about have worked. No matter how we label the photos, we see that people get rewarded when they Photoshop their photos a little bit. The only thing that penalizes them is when they overdo it. So what we so far have learned from the project is that we know that it could be rewarding for the people who are doing this. It could be companies or social influencers. We, of course, know from other work that it can create negative effect on young consumers. We have yet to find an effective solution, and that's definitely something that I would love to hear your insight and think about what we can do when it comes to the platform, governments, and policies that can help to correct this so that in some way we can reward real authentic images out there and penalize those images that are altered. So I want to thank my collaborators from all around the world, from Shanghai, Hong Kong, Amsterdam to Canada, for working with me on this line of projects. And we're happy to share the data, stimulate everything you might be interested in, and happy to chat more about each of these projects offline. Thank you very much.